With the amount of money I've spent on all of this cool stuff, I probably could have afforded some avocado on toast. Like everything else in this world, prices in wargaming are getting pretty out of hand. To be honest, they're already pretty out of hand, and you know who will probably be slapping another price hike on us soon. It doesn't matter when you're watching this video, it's either just happened or it's about to. But for the last few years there has been an alternative, and that alternative is getting cheaper, faster, and higher quality. 3D printing. The alternative is 3D printing. To be honest, I've been pretty slow off the mark when it comes to 3D printing. So when Anycubic reached out and asked if I wanted to try out the Photon M7 PRO, I said sure. But this is not a review channel, and because Anycubic set this out as part of some kind of sponsorship, it would be pretty shit of me to push this with any kind of bias. So instead we're going to paint some Heretic Legion models that are going to stand in for my trench coasts. If you're not familiar with Trench Crusade lore or trench coats specifically, they're basically just fallen heretic soldiers that after they've died, the earth rejected their bodies, heaven rejected their souls, and for some reason they can't go to hell. Do you know how much of an arsehole you have to be for even hell to not let you in? After all that, now they're basically just an undead warband roaming around the battlefield trying to find anything that they kind of want. If you're coming from 40k, think of the motto of even in death I still serve, mixed with the Blood Raven mentality of yoink. There is a slight difference with this game though. I didn't really just want to kit bash gas masks onto Nighthawk models. So instead we're going to channel our inner ghost hunters and paint them as if they're spirits being viewed through thermal vision. As expected, this is the gradient that we want to set. It's essentially purple to yellow. To pull this off, we're going to be using a similar idea to volumetric highlighting, but not this style. It's going to look a little bit more like this. Instead of painting up towards a light source, we're going to be painting a glowing stick figure. It sounds weird, but keep that in mind. Since we're going to be working towards creating basically a thermal map, our deepest, darkest color is going to be Diabolic Plum. You don't need an airbrush, it's just quicker. This little diagram up here is showing you that we're using a 50-50 mix between two colors. And this one happens to be Diabolic Plum and Wicked Pink, which is the first step towards making a glowing stick figure on the model. For this particular style, we absolutely need a golden angle, which is just the angle that you always want this miniature viewed from. Yes, this is a 3D space, but this is a very 2D idea. The dimensions of the model itself are really only providing us with details. But for a tabletop army, just do the same thing on the back too. When it comes to 3D printing, there are definitely some pros and cons. This one is a little bit on both sides because it's the cost factor. Bro, once you set up, it is a lot cheaper to buy bottles of resin, make them yourselves instead of buying, kit form. But the flip side of that is the con, because the initial outlay is a little pricier. In saying that, you can actually pick up a decent 3D printer for less money than what it actually costs you to buy a 2000 point 40k army. After our 50-50 mix, we're going straight into a pure Wicked Pink. And here's where we can actually start to see everything build up. While we're using the same idea as volumetric highlighting and light placement, we're doing it in a very different way. But we absolutely need the foundation of those techniques. The biggest one here is something that Vinci V would call shingles on a roof. Every time we step up and lay down the next color, it's going to take up just a little bit less space than the previous color did. And since we're working in half-step color changes for every single layer, it's going to gradually build a color transition. Which is especially helpful since we are actually changing colors and not just stepping up in brightness. Those 50-50 mixes are absolutely the GOAT when it comes to basic blending ideas and techniques. But there's a trick. When you're using bright, vibrant, saturated colors like we are with Wicked Pink here, the key to that saturation is opacity. Yes, we are absolutely going to throw down a second layer of Wicked Pink. But we're going to continue with that same shingles on a roof idea to really help that transition. So it says it's got a 4.3 touch control, 10.1 inch monochrome LCD 14K resolution, Photon Workshop Chitu box, leveling free, I like that, dual linear rails with 10, something that looks like a precision, improved ACF film, laser engraved build plate. I don't know what this is, but it works good. From here on out, you're actually going to start to see why I keep talking about a glowing stick figure on the model. Granted, working from dark to light, it is a little bit trickier to envision, so let me help you out with that one. Imagine this as a 2D outline. Then, inside that outline, you're going to draw where the skeleton would sit. And now, imagine that skeleton is glowing. You can almost think of it as an OSL from the skeleton. Now realistically, I know the skeleton itself isn't producing any heat. And yes, this is supposed to be thermal vision. But this is the most basic concept I can come up with to explain what should be the light placement. If you've seen any thermal vision images, you'll recognize that the cooler or the coldest parts are generally purple, and then the warmer they get, well, they warm up all the way until they get to sometimes a bright white, but we're not doing that here. We're just going to skip through the pinks, orange, and yellow. This is more based on concept instead of actual reality. Another few points of pros and cons is it's messy. And if you're anything like me, you're probably going to drip it everywhere. You got to pull off the supports, they're going to go everywhere, and you still have to wash them in isopropyl alcohol. It's not a huge deal, but it's definitely a factor. On the flip side, pro, it's fast. As far as wargaming miniatures go, mostly they're around the 1.5 to 2 inch kind of size. And something like the Photon M7 PRO that I'm using now, you can spit an entire plate of models out in about 2 hours. And honestly, in 2 hours having just about any model that you want, kind of a big deal. As we move into burning ore, we're going to continue painting less and less of essentially what is our glowing skeleton. Yes, we've already changed the analogy from a glowing stick figure to a glowing skeleton. Even though actual thermal vision images don't have a lot of detail, we want to kind of push a lot of detail. This is still a scale model and we still need to be able to read it. So as much as we are absolutely following along with that glowing skeleton idea, we still need that detail separation for readability. And all I'm actually doing to get that detail separation here is avoiding the recesses. Personally, I find it easier to avoid the recesses instead of painting wild, in place of coming back in with Diabolic Plum and going back and basically just black lining. But you do you, no judgment here. What I should be doing here is showing you all the Anycubic Photon M7 PRO and all of its really awesome features, with cinematic slow motion camera work and a whole bunch of dynamic lighting. And if that's what you wanted, I'm not your guy. I'm not overly experienced with 3D printing, wash and cure best practices and slicing software, and I probably never will be. As far as I'm concerned, this is a miniature painting vending machine. Press 3 buttons and a few hours later I get something to paint. And honestly, if I'd put more effort in than that, this video wouldn't exist. So if you need any better information than that, maybe go check out Fohammer. This is absolutely a step-by-step trust the process type of paint scheme. Because honestly, right up into those few last brush strokes, it's gonna look pretty rough. The other thing you may have noticed is what is happening with that rifle. And this all comes back to the idea of it is not light placement. Because we're trying to replicate a heat signature, for the rifle it means we have to somewhat suggest the transference of heat. And because it is only transference of heat, it is not going to be highlighted to the same levels as the rest of the model. We need the hands to look hotter than the surrounds of the rifle. In theory, this part here is a lot more like OSL. The rest of the model absolutely not, just think of the glowing skeleton stick figure thing. And yes, the crutch should be warmer, but I'll tell you why it's not in a minute. Hey, look at me in a different shirt, and that's because when I was filming, I forgot to mention that I am an Army Painter Factory team member. So if you head on over to the Army Painter web store and use code Heresy5 at the checkout, and then of course, if you're in Australia, head over to InGames, use that same Heresy5 code, you will get that same sweet discount. There is also links below to Anycubic, the Army Painter, InGames, the Patreon, and the merch store. We're finally into the last paint, which is a pure Moonbeam Yellow. And now to answer the question of why he doesn't have a glow coming out of those burning loins. And this actually comes back in a very similar way of thinking as the detail separation. This is still a miniature. While there is replication of some real world applications, we still need to force perspective and push focus. And because it's just like any other meatbag human form, we want to push that perspective and focus towards the head. He's done now. Because I don't get to go out and play as much as I'd like to, everything's kind of shifted more towards painting. And that means there's a lot more focus on aesthetic and display. And with that in mind, I took the official Trench Crusade bomb shrine, stuck it on a block, cut off the sides, and kind of made a mini diorama. While our one little hot-blooded Mr. Fahrenheit trench coat did look pretty cool by his own term, I did want to kind of push that effect a little further. And because the whole idea with the stick figure skeleton glowy thing was the heat was coming from within, it means to go further outside like into a terrain or any kind of display piece, we had to go further with color. And again, because it was getting further away from the model itself, it had to get darker.
If you're thinking about using this scheme for something that's purpose is tabletop wargaming, keep this in mind for when you're making the bases. It doesn't have to be as elaborate as this display piece, but it is nice to kind of think of when you are putting it into its own little universe. So while we did go into Terrestrial Titan as that base coat and then come in, of course, with the 50-50 mix of Terrestrial Titan and Diabolic Plum, every single step from here is the exact same colors that we've used to build up our trench coast. And we're going to be using those same ideas as the quote-unquote light placement. You don't have to reinvent the wheel just because it's a separate piece.
Last up on the pros and cons. With something like 3D printing taking place at home, there is a little bit of an environmental factor. Not the kind of environmental factor like the fish in the trees, but the effect that it can start to have on local friendly game stores. Obviously, when it comes to packaged goods in wargaming, we typically go to some kind of store. And people that own and run those stores kind of live off the money from those stores. There is a little bit of a fear that if everybody changes over to 3D printing, which they're not going to, that there will be an ongoing effect of physical stores closing down. But if we're going to be completely honest, models are very rarely the bread and butter of hobby stores. As far as miniature wargaming, it's usually the paints that keep that rolling. And if you want to be 100% obvious when it comes to hobby stores, is Magic the Gathering. So if you want to start 3D printing at home but still want to support your local store, go and buy some paint or some Magic cards. And the very last pro is the sheer variety that you have when it comes to miniatures and models. There are thousands of amazing digital creators these days, and a lot of their work is free. You can jump onto a whole bunch of different STL sites and basically find almost anything that you want. But like a lot of other creators and businesses in general, they do have sites that you can purchase the STLs from, or even Patreons where you get a monthly subscription and they just keep rolling them out.
While there's a lot of details and textures going on in this base, we're still going to try and keep to the same concept. And for this one, I'm actually going to do something that I almost never ever do because I very rarely agree with it when it comes to scale models. And that is letting the natural light do its thing. I'm only actually painting around certain details where the miniature itself is going to be placed. For everything else that's going to stay that dark Terrestrial Titan, I'm just going to let the real world light and shadow kind of play around that can pick the details out for us. And the reason I typically don't like doing this is because real world light on a scale model is obviously not scaled light. It very, very rarely makes sense as far as an in-world atmosphere with the model goes. But for this one in particular, because we're using a thermal vision idea or a concept, we're not actually playing with light placement. Which means we don't actually have to control every single aspect of where the light's hitting, what it's doing, and how it's reacting with its environment. Something that Sam Lenz said has stuck with me for a very, very long time. Miniature painting is in between imitation and animation. Which I've always taken to believe that even though we are trying to replicate real world things, we also have to take some of that artistic license to kind of make it make sense. Remember that. I think at this point it's fairly obvious that I really enjoy Predator. And while this is a little more 2010-2018 Predators instead of the classic, it's still kind of a killer concept. I want to say a massive thank you to Anycubic for sponsoring the video, the Army Painter, in-games, and all of the amazing Patreon members that keep this rolling. Big love, you filthy heretics.